turn your Bibles to the book of Esther, just right before the book of Job there in the Old Testament. Book of Esther. We'll be in Esther chapter 4 tonight. Try not to be too long with this. But Esther chapter 4, before we begin reading, I just want to catch you up to speed on what's going on. Maybe get a workout. I got a lot. I'm going to be doing a lot of explaining and a little preaching tonight, if that's all right. But book of Esther, if you're not familiar with it, just to catch you up on the story, the entire world was under the rule of Persia at this time. They were under the Persian Empire, and that included the Jews. They were part of that. King Xerxes is on the throne, and he calls a banquet with all of his princes and all of his captains and leaders, and he's got some business, some kingdom business to discuss. And his wife, Vashti, disagreed with some of the things he was going to do. So she didn't show up to the banquet. And that's just something you didn't do back then. I mean, you just did not do that. And when that happened, everybody, all them princes were looking at him like, yeah, we know who wears the pants in that family. Maybe we should be bowing down to the queen, you know. And it was really a problem for him. I mean, it's something that could literally divide the kingdom. So what King Xerxes did, he said, all right. He said, Vashti's queen no more. And I mean, he just divorced her on the spot. And so now he has no queen. And so what his advisors tell him, said, hey, we're gonna call virgins from every part of the kingdom. And basically what they had, for lack of a better term, was a big kingdom-wide competition for queen. I mean, beauty contest, all this different stuff. Anyway, during this time, this young Jewish orphan by the name of Hadassah got picked to go before the king. That's who Esther was. That's her Jewish name was Hadassah. They changed it to Esther because they didn't want the king to know she was a Jew because they were under persecution. They just kind of wanted to keep that aside at the time. Well, it just so happens that Xerxes falls in love with Esther, and he marries her, makes her queen. Now she's queen over all the land. And during this same time, there was a man by the name of Haman. And Haman basically conspired his way to become Xerxes' right-hand man. And Haman hated the Jews. I mean, he was a Hitler-esque type of person. He wanted to use his power to destroy the Jews as a people. And are you all right?
Yeah.
My goodness. No wonder it's on 77. Maybe I should have preached on the hill tonight. Anyway, Haman works his way up to be Xerxes' right-hand man. And Haman convinces Xerxes to sign this decree into law that would basically allow him to destroy all the Jews at will. I mean, he would have eradicated the Jews. Well, Mordecai, which is Esther's uncle, hears about this, and he contacts her through a mediator. And he's upset when he hears this decree is signed into law and all the Jews are going to die. He starts getting worried about it. And this is where the story picks up in chapter 4. I won't have you stand because I'm going to read a lot tonight. It says, when Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went out in the midst of the city and cried with loud and bitter cry, and came even before the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing. And many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it to her. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved, and she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai to take away his sackcloth from him. but he received it not. Then called Esther for Hatak, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend upon her, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. So Hatak went forth to Mordecai unto the street of the city, which was before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him, and of the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay the king's treasury for the Jews to destroy them. Also he gave him the copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it unto Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go into the king, to make supplication unto him, and to make request before him for her people. And Hatak came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Again Esther spake unto Hatak, and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know, now listen to this, that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court, who is not called there, is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. And they told Mordecai Esther's words. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, Think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from the place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Now here's her answer. Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast you for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise. And so will I go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. I want to preach tonight on the subject of when God can't be found. When God can't be found. You know, one thing I love about the book of Esther, you know, it's the only book in the entire Bible where the name of God is not found one time. The name of God is not found one time in the book of Esther. And yet his hand and his sovereignty is not more clearly seen in any other book of the Bible. And the message here is that even when God doesn't seem like he's around, he's working behind the scenes. He's doing something. And here, in this situation right here, it seemed to be a hopeless situation. It was a life and death situation. And yet God already had everything set up. I mean, even up to this point, isn't it amazing that of all the people that the most powerful man in the world could have married and fell in love with, he falls in love with this little poor, broke, Jewish orphan named Esther. Isn't that something? God put it in his heart to love Esther. He had her in that place, the Bible even says, for such a time as this. God's at work even when we don't see it. And when I look at Esther's life, we can learn a lot from her about what to do when it seems like God's not around. She did some things we need to take note of. What should we do when God can't be found in our life? What should we do when it feels like our prayers are hitting the ceiling? What should we do when it seems like God has forsaken us? Number one, we need to realize that he is here. We need to realize that he is here. Even when he seems like he's not, he's here. He promised in Hebrews 13 verse 5, he says, I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee. The Bible also says that God cannot lie. And so even when it seems like he's not there, he is. So why is it that we have times in our life when we go through trials and we go through problems and it seems like God is not there and he's not hearing our prayers and he's not listening to us? Well, he's there. But he's backing off because he wants to show us his power in a different way. He wants to show us his strength in a different way. In this case, it was allowing a nobody, the most unlikely candidate, in the most impossible situation to save an entire people. God uses those times in our life when it seems like he's nowhere around to show his power I mean, really, if I just was hovering around it all the time and never backed off just a little bit, they would never grow up with us. They would be so helpless and dependent upon us. I never forget, I went to Brother Ernie Perham's funeral, and I heard his oldest son preach. It's one of their only, I believe it was their only natural born child, if I'm remembering. It may have been the sister, don't hold me to that. But he said that Daddy always taught us to be independent from him and dependent upon God. That's what we need. And if I brooded my kids all the time, they'd never grow up. I'm trying to teach them to do things by themselves, and in order to do that, I have to back off. It pleases me when I see them, and they don't do it all the time, we're working on that, but it pleases me when at a distance, I watch my kids saying, ma'am and sir to other people. I like that. You know what I'm doing? I'm seeing the things that I've instilled in them, even though I'm not standing over them. God does the same thing with us. He just stands back at a distance. He wants to see if that strength and that faith and that knowledge He's put in us all these years is going to come out in the times we don't think He's standing over us. And that's when true character is shown, by the way. It's not shown when the right people are standing over us, but when we're by ourselves and when we're with wrong people. We need to realize that He is here. He's just showing us His strength in a different way. And when He shows His strength, should we remain faithful like Esther did, we're going to see some amazing things take place. And when I think about this idea of showing strength in a different way and showing His sovereignty in His hand in a different way, I cannot help but think of one of the most beautiful illustrations I've ever heard in my life. I don't know how many of y'all remember, it's probably been close to 2 years ago, Brother Thomas Wilson, in devotion, he shared the story of the Cherokee rite of passage. And the Cherokee rite of passage is simply this. Whenever a young boy was growing into a young man, and it was time for him to become a Cherokee brave, what they would do was that young boy's father would take him out to the middle of the woods. I'm talking about way on out. And he would sit him there on a tree stump, and he would blindfold him. And the rules were this. He had to sit there the entire night, and he could not move. No matter what kind of noises he heard, no matter what kind of wild animals he heard, no matter what kind of dangers were in the darkness, he could not get up, and he could not take the blindfold off, and he could not cry out for help. He had to sit there, and that's the only way. If he made it through the night, and the sun shone the next morning through that blindfold, he had become a man. He had become a Cherokee brave. The only other rule was that they were not allowed to tell anybody about the Cherokee rite of passage. It was something for every young boy to do for themselves. They could not share their experience of what happened. And can you imagine sitting there all night with a blindfold on out in the middle of the woods? Friend, I can't even walk to that church when it's dark. Y'all think I'm playing? Y'all think I'm joking. If I can't get a hold of the light, I just come back next day. Amen. But, I mean, out there with every snap of the twig, you think, man, is that a wolf? Is that a bobcat? What is that? Every noise, every howl. I mean, everything just, talk about terrifying all night long by yourself. But you had to stay there if you was going to become a man, if you were going to become a brave. And what happened is, the next morning when that young boy, when that sun shone through his blindfold, he knew it was over. What would happen is he would take off the blindfold just to sit. His father had been sitting next to him all night long, protecting him from the dangers that lay there. That's just how it is with God. When it seems like God can't be found, He's right there. And when the blinders come off, we're going to know He was there the whole time. Amen. Isn't that something? That little boy worried all night long. He fretted all night long at every sound. But he was safe. Father was right there the whole time. We need to realize and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day, I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. Now what is happening is, Esther is the only hope that the Jews have. She's the queen. She needs to talk to the king and get this thing overturned. Nobody knows she's a Jew, including the king. And here he's at this meeting. He's been there for 30 consecutive days. And the law says if she walks into his courts uninvited, it could cost her her very life. Just like with Vashti not showing at the banquet, she divorced her on the spot. You just didn't do that. It was disrespect. It was saying that she was in charge, and it could cost her her life. If he didn't raise his second, you raised his second to her, it was okay. She could approach you. If not, she's dead. So Mordecai's begging her to go talk to the king, and she said, okay, I'll go, but y'all fast. I'm calling a fast for 3 days and 3 nights, and I'll go. And if I perish, I perish. So Esther knew that in this critical situation, she had to reach heaven at all costs. And instead of going instantly, she called a fast for 3 days and 3 nights. The Bible has a lot to say about fasting and prayer. In Matthew 17, verse 21, if you'll recall, there was a demon-possessed boy, and the disciples couldn't cast the demon out. When Jesus showed up, he cast the demon out, and they said, well, why couldn't we do that? And he looked at him and he said, and I tell you what, let's just turn there. I'm going to read that, what he said. Matthew 17, excuse me. Matthew 17, 21. Hold your place in Esther. They asked him why they couldn't do it. In verse 20, and Jesus said to them, because of your unbelief. For verily I say unto you, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you shall say unto this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall be removed, and nothing shall be impossible to you. Howbeit this kind goeth not out, but by prayer and fasting. And so she calls a fast. You can go back to history. She knew that she had to reach heaven. Even if it doesn't seem like God is with us, we need to be with Him. He wants us to acknowledge Him, that we need Him. He doesn't want us to continue on as if we've got the strength to do it, we can take care of it, we can handle it. Look, God likes to put us in places where nothing else will work. God likes to work when nothing else will. If we could take care of ourselves, normally we would. We've got to reach heaven at all costs. And I can tell you, I have been at a place in my life, as low as a person can possibly go. And I remember I fasted for, ironically, 3 days and 3 nights because I didn't care. I didn't want to eat. I had no appetite. I had to get a hold of God. And do you know that not only did He heal my heart, but He fixed the situation totally and turned it around? Hey, when you need God enough, you get a hold of Him. I know people that have fasted a lot longer than that. But I tell you what, 3 days and 3 nights, that's a long time for me. But God fixed the situation. He gave me the grace to do it too. We got to reach heaven, friend. Thirdly, not only do we need to reach heaven, hurrying along, look, we need to resolve to persevere. Look at what Esther said in verse 16. And so will I go into the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. Look, that's the kind of attitude we got to have. You know what she's saying? We're going to fast and pray that God fixes the situation. We're going to fast and pray that God just makes everything right and everything turns out the way we want it to turn out. But They said, we're not going to bow down, O king. Hey, our God's able to deliver us, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow. Well, they threw him in the fiery furnace, but God showed up with them. And that's the thing, we got a backwards Christianity these days. Our motto is, hey, God can deliver me, but if he don't, I ain't going to serve him. It shouldn't be that way. We got to resolve to persevere. And that's exactly what Esther did. Look at chapter 5 and verse 1. Now it came to pass on the third day, after all the fasting was over, that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. God answered that prayer. Proverbs 21 verse 1 says that the heart of the king is in the hand of the Lord. And it says that the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther, and what is thy request? It shall be even given to thee unto the half of the kingdom. So not only did he spare her life, but he said, hey, I'll give you whatever you want. Up to half the kingdom, whatever you want, it's yours. So you know what ended up happening? You know that old wicked Haman that thought he had all this thing worked out? He actually had built some gallows to kill her uncle Mordecai, because when he would go through the streets, everybody would bow down to him, but he said, no, I bow only to my God. He didn't bow down to him. So he said, I'll fix that Jew. He fixed these gallows to hang Mordecai on. Well, as it turns out, because of what Esther did, the Jews were all saved, and the king hung Haman from the gallows that he built for Mordecai. See, God was in control of that thing. God had his hand in that thing, even though his name is never seen, even when it seems that God could not be found. God was in the midst of everything. We've got to resolve to persevere in our life, even when the things don't go right. True faith obeys in the face of hardship and persecution. Look, what kind of faith does it take to be happy when everything's going right? It doesn't take any faith to be okay when you got plenty of money in the bank. It doesn't take any faith when your health is fine and you're not facing any kind of problems. It doesn't take any faith when your relationships and your marriages and your children are all doing fine. That does not take any faith. True faith obeys in the face of hardship and persecution. She said, I'm going, and if I perish, I perish. Look, Mordecai said it right. He told Esther, he said, hey, God's put you here for such a time as this. And she was the most unlikely candidate in the most impossible situation. Yet Haman hung, and they were all saved. Even when it seems that God isn't around, that things are not going right, we can't quit. We can't quit. We got to resolve to persevere. We got to reach heaven, and we got to realize that He's here. I want to do something here. I want everybody to turn to Isaiah 58. Isaiah 58, verse 5 and 6, and even on into 7 and on, is the greatest definition for how God looks at fasting. Verse 5, it says, Is it such a fast that I have chosen, a day for a man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow down his head as a bulrush, and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Wilt thou call this a fast, an acceptable day to the Lord? Is not this the fast that I have chosen? This is God talking. Is it not the fast that I have chosen to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, that she may break every yoke? That's his idea of what fasting accomplishes. It gets God's message on my heart, and he put this on my heart to do, and I got to think about that. You know, Esther was facing a critical time. And it was a serious, serious time. And she called a fast for 3 days and 3 nights. And I'm telling you, what our pastor is going through in the next week is serious. I mean, I'm just telling you, it's serious. And he's tired, he's wore out, and it's really, really important that they get it in remission this time. This needs to stop now. And what I want to do as a church, I want to call a fast from tonight to the next Wednesday. I'm not talking about going every day without food and water. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about whatever God leads you individually to do. Because I understand everybody's different. Everybody's got, different medical situations. I get that. But I want to challenge you to do this. If you can, would you just make up in your mind that at least one meal a day, just one meal a day, you're going to say, God, instead of eating this meal, I'm going to get alone. I'm going to pray for my pastor this day. Just one meal a day. And as a church, if we do that together, we can watch God work. I'm not saying you have to stop at one meal. I know what God's told me to do, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to challenge you. As a church, I want to call a fast, and I want to pray for our pastor that he has strength to get through this chemo, and that they get this thing in remission. And that's what I want to do. I want to pray for him.